Analyzing the evolution of the internet usage from 1990 to 2020 by myself, Abel. When we think of the internet, we often envision Google, Gmail, Wikipedia, or even YouTube for some of us. But have you ever wondered how the internet came into existence? Or even more importantly, how can we make changes that can affect the way businesses function? How can we make it affordable and accessible for everyone around the globe? The internet remarkable expansion from 1990 to 2020, marked by a staggering average annual growth of 45%, has brought about a profound transformation in the way we gather information, get access around the globe, and how businesses function around the world. But there's one issue that emerges when this happens. Only 59% of the world population had internet access back in 2020. Looking at my data model, I had 5 different tables. The first one was measuring/tasks, which showcases the different columns that I had, new columns that I created after importing the data into Power BI. We have the different measures that I created while working on the project. We also have my refresh date, which showcases which date the data was last refreshed. In the bottom left, we have country/continent, which showcases what kind of countries I had, what continents, and which location the data came from. We also have global internet usage, which showcases all the different facts that we have from the main data set. Last but not least, we have calendar, which showcases the different dates in my data set. Let's look at my KPIs. I had a total of 4 KPIs with some KPIs that came along with it. With that being said, what is a KPI? KPI, Key Performance Indicator, also known as KPI in short form, is a simpler way to showcase a whole data set without having that much of explanation, but showing the main numbers or the big main numbers. Top right, we have internet users, which showcase the total internet users from 1990 all the way to 2020. In the bottom, we have new yearly users, which showcases how many yearly users we have in average. So compared to the top one, which is internet users, this one is an average of that, which showcased that we had like a 7.5 million average users from 1990 all the way to 2020. Below that, we have cellular subscription, which showcases for every 100 people around the globe from 1990 to 2020, we had an average of 55. So in this case, I would say 55%. And then last but not least, we have broadband subscription. In this case, it's a percentage because it's being compared to cellular subscription. As you can see, we have 11%, which showcases that 11% out of 53 people had access or had paid for broadband subscriptions. Throughout any project, when you're working on a specific project, you will always find yourself running into issues no matter what. I had 3 main issues. The first one was sourcing the right data set that no one has ever done before, that's unique, and that's something that connects with me as an individual because I like playing video games, I like video creation, and I like consuming internet information. With that being said, you might have the right data set, but if you don't have the right KPIs, which is the next thing that I ran into, is finding the right KPIs that can showcase this data set without having to explain that much. So finding the internet users, newly internet users, and cellular and broadband subscription was kind of hard, but I was eventually able to. Last but not least is the charts. You might have the perfect data set, the perfect KPIs, but if you don't have the perfect charts and visualizations to showcase the project, then people are not going to be able to understand what's really going on deeper into the data set. Looking at my project. With the dashboard, in the top left, we have the logo, and then in the left side, we have the different KPIs that I had, as I talked about, internet users, new yearly users, cellular subscriptions, and broadband subscription. And then bottom left, we have, last but not least, refresh date. In the top right, we have the yearly slicer, which allows you to choose different years depending on what you want to look at specifically. In this case, I can show you 2000 to 2009. As you can see, the charts moving around, showcasing what kind of data set you want to what kind of data you want to consume. So, of course, while working with this project, I had some positive and negative key insights. In this case, let's start with positive. In Europe countries, specifically, as you can see, in Europe back in 1998, you could see that we had a new yearly users of 1.4 million, which had grown very high by 63 from 1997. But if you were to look at 1999 from 1998, it almost doubled, growing by 72%. Another key insight that I found in 2020, specifically in the African continent, we could see that in 2020, this broadband subscription grew by 24%, which is much higher compared to only 10% in the previous year. So if we were to look at 2019, in the bottom left right here, we could see the broadband subscription had grown by 2%. Remember, this 2% is compared to cellular subscription. So even though it's just a 2% increase compared, or it's just 2%, it's been compared to cellular subscription, which showcases that for every 87 people out of 100 that had cellular subscription, 2% of those people had broadband subscription. So if we were to look at 2020, broadband subscription had, even though it's just 3%, out of 89, it had went up by 24%. Of course, when working with a specific project, you're going to find yourself having issues or finding very low numbers, or finding that some places in the data set dipped in numbers. So if we're to look at Asian countries, even though it's the biggest, it still had some issues when it came into 2020, where cellular subscription dropped by 3%. So if we're to look at 2019, cellular subscription specifically, we had 131 out of 100, which means what? That some people had more than one. So like myself right now, I have 2. So that counts as 2 cellular subscriptions for one person, even though for every 100 people, 131 across the globe back in 2019. This was during COVID, which means that more people were using cellular subscriptions than any other. But if we're to look at 2020, the peak of COVID, we had less people using cellular subscription, which means that some people were maybe unable to pay for it, or we had less number, which showcases that we dropped by 3%. Now let's look at Oceania countries. In Oceania countries, even though they're the lowest amount of users, they had a very big difference when it comes to their broadband subscription. As you can see here, New Zealand had a different number compared to every other broadband subscription. As you can see, we have Fiji, New Caledonia, Solar, all the way to the left, showcasing that their user year-over-year cellular subscription, or their internet usage, was the lowest compared to other continents. Let's go back into Africa specifically. Even though, as you can see here, Africa had the highest average growth compared to other continents when it compared to cellular users year-over-year and broadband subscription. If we were to look at 2016 in Africa, so if we were to look at 2015 in Africa, we had a 5% growth. We had 85, this is in Africa 2015, 85 people out of 100 had cellular subscription across the continent of Africa. But if we were to look at 2016, this had dropped by 2%, even though it's just one person for every 100 people that dropped down compared to 2015, it was a very big difference. So how can we improve? As I asked you before, how important is it to improve these things? As I said before, here are some ways we can improve the affordability and accessibility of internet across the globe. We should make phones work better in places that are still developing, like countries in Africa, countries in Oceania, even some countries like Australia down in Africa, where there are only 32 smartphones for every 100 people who have cellular subscriptions. This is really important for creating more jobs for people, improving education and healthcare across the country or across the continent. It's really important to also make sure the internet is better in some places to reach more people. In places like China, even though you saw in the data set, China was the biggest, or in this case, Asia was the biggest. But specifically, if you're to look into that, we could see that China was the biggest and Russia, closely followed by Russia. But the countries around China did not have that much internet users. As you can see here, in China specifically, we had 126 million users compared to the other countries just around it with only 37 average. We have also rural versus urban areas. As I talked about before, we have China compared to the rest countries. The digital divide is a big gap between the number of people uses the internet in rural areas compared to cities. As you can see here, we have 900,000 users in rural, but when it comes into the main cities, we have 86 million, almost 86 times when it came to the divide. Last but not least, improving the internet in less advanced places, such as Oceania, where the internet availability is growing by 50% 15% every year. Compared to all the other continents, they had a very big jump compared to 1990 to 2020. But if we were to look at specifically Oceania, they only had a steady growth of 15% year over year. Again, my name is Abel Kirui. Thank you for listening. Any questions?